All right. Hey, gang, we did it. We made it to contemporary art. And also, we made it to the end of the semester. This is our last slide presentation for Art 100. Please hold your tears to the end. I just can't take it. But obviously, in this presentation, we're going to talk about artists who are living and working today in a contemporary world. So, I kind of want to talk about where we are as an art world today. And it's been a pretty fascinating roller coaster as we've gone through a history of art, especially art in the 20th century, into the 20th century here in America. So, there's always been this relationship between form and content. Form is the physical appearance of a work of art, whether it's a painting, a sculpture, a drawing. It's also formal elements like line, shape, value, and color. And that's tied to aesthetics, right? We look at something and we get a certain feeling. On the other end of that is content. Content is what is the artwork about, the who, what, where, when, and why. The concepts that the artist originally intended, the content that we as an audience get from the artwork. This deals with subject matter. And quite often it seems like these have been sort of at odds with each other. Well, today, I would argue that these things are marrying together beautifully to create some pretty amazing art. People always talk about, oh, if you could live at any time, when would it be? And I got to be honest, I'd love to be in Paris in the early 1900s and hang out with Picasso and Modigliani and Dali and things like that. But if I could choose any time to live, it's today, right now. Okay, because I think the artwork's in a pretty stable place where you have people that are working with form and aesthetics and making some pretty beautiful paintings and sculptures that are aesthetically pleasing and nice to look at. But they also have some really interesting content. They're tackling some really interesting subject matter as well, and it's all sort of coming together. Because we've seen us go back and forth during abstract expressionism. It was all about form and formalism. It's just splattered paint and things like that. And then we get to artwork that's, just a little bit too beautiful, is not about concepts, doesn't really have any heavy concepts to them. So let's back up a little bit and let's start by talking about photorealism and specifically this artist, because I think what he did really informs where art is at today. Anyone remember his name? We talked about him when we were talking about painting, and he would make the blobs and shapes. His name is Chuck Close. So the answer to question one is Chuck Close, where the paintings always look different up close than they do far away. But this painting, I think, is more important than a lot of people give it stock because he made this painting right after graduate school. And in graduate school, he said he was a really bad Willem de Kooning, and he was doing abstract expressionism. That's all shapes and colors and throwing paint around. And when he got out of graduate school, he thought, the art world needs a change. And ironically, his change is pretty old fashioned. He went to representational style of painting that have been around, geez, way before the Renaissance. And he also started to paint from photographs. Now, that was new. In 1967, if you would have painted from a photograph, people would have thought you were cheating. They thought you sold out. No, you can't do that, right? But he did. And artists today work from photos all the time. And it's not considered to be illegal or bad art. And so photorealism, I think, really informed what a lot of artists are doing today. And his paintings are pretty incredible, and you can still see them. They have one of them at the Broad Museum up in LA, but they're amazingly detailed, they're amazingly realistic. So, formally, he's got a lot of painting talent. He's using value and shape and light and color that Vasari talked about all the way back in the Renaissance. And they're pretty amazing paintings to witness in person. Here's another photorealist, and when we talked about photorealism and its relationship to photography, Richard Estes worked from photographs. He would project his photograph onto a canvas, he would trace it, and then he would paint it with for years, people thought, wow, that's cheating. That's not art, right? You must not be an artist. You're just copying. Okay, but a lot of artists today are taking these ideas because it helps them technically. Here's another photo realist named Ralph Goings in the 90s, and he started to make these amazing realistic paintings, which formally they're beautiful. It's yes, this is a painting. This is not a photograph. And so we had this interesting period in the 80s and 90s where you had this group of photorealists that are making technically amazing paintings, but then they start to lack a little bit in content, right? What is this painting about? No one really stood in front of a Ralph Goings and said, what is he trying to say, right? It's just a great painting of a donut. Now, during this time, you also had neo-expressionism that we talked about, and you had artists that are coming up with interesting content, but you had artists that really wanted to focus on mastering painting realism. Okay, now I experienced this in my lifetime as an art professor. I went to art school in the early 90s, and then I started teaching around this time. And I thought it was pretty fascinating that art students, when they started to take my painting classes and they said, I want to paint realistic like that. Because when I went to art school, no one wanted to paint really realistic. It was more about creating these new and different ways to paint. It was more about how you paint and not what you paint. And now it's about how do we make these realistic style of paintings. But like I said, content is kind of lacking in these photorealists because it's just a great painting of a ketchup bottle, right? It's a great painting of ketchup and salt, right? There's no one's really racking their brains of what this is about. Now we could stretch it and say, well, this is about Americana and the diner, but it's really just a great painting of ketchup. I always joke that this is not just a sugar shaker. This is like the sugar shaker, right? It's got really symmetrical. It's big and kind of up, like an ode to the sugar shaker, but it's just painted very, very well. Then you had a group of artists that are like, okay, I'm going to paint technically well, formally well, very representational and realistic, but I'm going to start bringing in some content, right? Some more interesting subject matter. And Dennis Peterson is one of them that we talked about. He went to Darfur and he started to paint the people who were going through this genocide in Darfur at the time and the struggles that everyone was going with. Definitely a photorealist painting. We know this is painted from a photo. How do we know again? Because of depth of field. The focus is on the eyes, the back of the ear is blurred, the necklace is blurred, and so that's how a camera sees and not so much how the human eye sees. Here's another one he did called The Apocalypse. So he dealt with some pretty heavy content and pretty heavy subject matter. This is a man who's homeless and he's living in this cardboard box. And so people talk about the apocalypse and the end of the world is coming. We'll tell that to the guy who's living in this box, right? The end of the world has kind of already come for him. But this is a painting with acrylic inks, painting medium, and watercolor pencils on paper. So this is like drawn, right, with watercolor pencils and acrylic inks. So very, very realistic. And when Dennis Peterson came about and a couple other artists associated with him, they started to say, nah, this isn't photorealism anymore. This isn't just from a photo. This is hyper realistic. And so this group of artists become known as the hyper realists, right? The hyper realistic artists. Oh, I should have had that on the slide. Let me put that here. So you write it down. If it's written down here, you're going to write it down, right? Hyperrealism. Sorry, I can't. I obviously can't type and talk at the same time. Hyperrealism. There you go. Write that one down. Here's a hyperrealist sculptor. His name is Ron Mueck. I know I'm mispronouncing his name. I had a student once and say, you know, you're mispronouncing his name. And they told me, but I should have recorded their voice because I still get it wrong. I could go on Google and get voice recorder, but anyway, he does these hyper-realist sculptures that are absolutely remarkable to see. Talk about trompe-l'oeil, remember that term, to fool the eye? This is his sculpture, and these are real people sort of visiting his sculpture. I was lucky enough to see these a couple times. They have one at the Hirshhorn in DC, and I saw another one. I forget where I was at, but when you stand, it's hyper realistic. It's just this odd feeling of seeing something that's so realistic, but so big. It's like what it would be like to witness a giant or something like that. Here's another one where this is an actual person sitting in the museum, and this is his sculpture. And so he makes oversized fabric. He actually uses real hair, sometimes human, usually like an animal hair. And then he'll go in and he uses different types of synthetics and rubbers and plastics for the skin, and then he'll go in and paint them and sort of hand paint them. Here's an image I saw of him working on his sculpture where he'll actually make sculpture tools to make his oversized sculpture, like hair curlers and different combs and brushes and stuff like that. Here's a cool one that I found of this fetus that's crated. And I find this conceptually interesting because artwork is created by an artist in a studio. And most people think artwork isn't really born or doesn't become art until an audience sees it. And so an artist makes an art in the studio, that's like the art in the womb. Then they crate it, or the museum comes and crates it and boxes it. They ship it to the museum. Then once they open the crate and the audience sees it, the art is born. So this is kind of like a baby fetus and the art being born in a crate instead of a womb. Sorry, I got a little too heavy there. He also has done smaller versions as well. So he mainly does the oversized, but he's also done little ones. This is kids' hands on a pedestal of these two people sort of spooning here. And so during today and during this time period, it's kind of hard to define a group of artists in a movement because it's ever evolving and ever changing, right? The photorealists came out in the 60s and 70s, and then in the 90s and 2000s, we start calling them hyperrealists. And we talked about in the last presentation about Ron English is known as a lowbrow artist, and Mark Ryden is known as a pop surrealist. Where all these artist movements and all these names like lowbrow and pop surrealism, juxtaposed was another one for these group of contemporary artists, and then street art like Shepard Fairey and Banksy came out. All these names usually come from art critics. Artists usually don't say, I'm a pop surrealist or I'm whatever. They just say, I'm Mark Ryden and I'm a painter, you know? Usually these labels and these movements are put on by art critics. And today, because of the internet, because we're so global, there's so many critics out there, right? There's so many people that's saying that's good art, that's bad art, and this is why. And they write about it and they make blogs and they do internet posts and they'll come up with names for these artists. And so it's hard to really define art movements today because there's so many different types. But we're still under the umbrella movement of postmodern, because these artists are being inspired by so many different elements and they're all sort of coming together, like Takashi Murakami. Takashi Murakami is from Japan. He's a Japanese artist. He now lives in America. He splits his time between New York and LA. And we're a real global art world now. So you can live in Japan, or you can move to New York, or you can live in Paris and LA or wherever you want. And you can be a famous artist, and everyone sort of inspires each other. And so his work is kind of an amalgam of Japan anime and things that he learned within American pop art as well, with the colors and the shapes, the reoccurring characters that he uses. All of it sort of comes together. There's a blurred line today between fine art and commercial art. And a lot of that has, well, not a lot, everything has to do with what Warhol did and what Keith Haring did by opening the pop shop. Because now you have fine artists that are working with celebrity and musicians and popular culture and commercial and everything all together. For instance, Takashi Murakami did this bear. Anyone know who this bear is? It's for a musician. Kanye West. Yeah, the answer to number 2 is Kanye West. So you have this really intermingling between fine art and popular culture and music and commercialism, and everything sort of comes together. He also did these Louis Vuitton purses. You think Louis Vuitton purses are expensive. Go price yourself a Takashi Murakami Louis Vuitton purses. And now a lot of artists work with Louis Vuitton. Every time I'm at Fashion Island, I like to go to the Louis Vuitton store because sometimes they'll have a contemporary artist that will not only design purses, but they'll design the whole store. So it's kind of cool to see fine art and commercial sort of coming together. Here's another artist, John Curran. He's a contemporary painter. And we can see this postmodern influence because when you look at him, right away they kind of remind me of the Baroque period. Remember we talked about Baroque was these like aristocratic people and a lot of still lives where they would paint. Um, I'm thinking of like Caravaggio, where he had I'm going blank on the god of wine, his Dionysus figure, who's kind of swirling the wine, and he's got all the flowers and fruits in front of him. That's him showing like what he could paint and his skill. I can paint anything. This is John Curran saying like, look, I'm technically a talented formal painter. I can paint a whole turkey and all of its rich colors when it's raw. But notice how he's exaggerating his figures. There's almost like this illustration and sort of comic book influence on a Baroque. So it's an amalgam of all these different influences that are coming together in contemporary artists. His stuff is kind of Baroque, kind of like cartoon or animation sort of coming together. Lisa Yuskavage is very similar. Both John Curran and Lisa Yuskavage are American artists. They went to school, at graduate school at Yale, and they painted together, but they were influenced by a lot of illustration, animation, Japanese art, German expressionism. Hers kind of looked like American and Japanese manga sort of amalgam and sort of coming together. Here's a contemporary artist named Will Cotton, and I always joke today that painting today is very aesthetically and visually pleasing, and you could almost call it eye candy, right? A lot of times you'll go to a contemporary painting exhibit and there's saturated colors and objects that we recognize from the past, like cartoons that we have seen, and they're colorful, they're like eye candy. And then I stumbled across Will Cotton. I was like, oh my gosh, he's literally painting candy, right? And he does these figures sort of dressed in candy. He does these landscapes and this world of candy, because painting today is like eye candy and it's very visually pleasing. And I also like his name, Will Cotton, kind of reminds me of cotton candy. But he's doing these, gorgeous, scrumptious, paintings of these worlds of candy, which is obviously inspired by someone like Wayne Thiebaud. Okay, Wayne Thiebaud we talked about in painting that did the cakes and pastries. He was a pop artist from the 1960s, 1970s. Like I said, celebrity and commercialism is all, and fine art is all sort of come together. He worked with Katy Perry, and he did some paintings with Katy Perry, just like Takashi Murakami had worked with Kanye West. Here's some cool paintings by a contemporary artist named Cecily Brown. And I love her work because it definitely looks contemporary because of the shapes and the colors, and it's really saturated. But in a postmodern idea, she's also looking back to modern art because they look very similar to an abstract expressionist painting. They kind of remind me of Willem de Kooning or something like that. But I don't know, I've had an interesting relationship personally with Cecily Brown because I'm not a big fan of abstract expressionism. I like the idea because of a history of art, and I love a history of art, of like what the abstract expressionists were doing. But when I look at them, I don't really stand in front of them for very long. But I stand in front of Cecily Brown's for a long time. And I don't know, but to me, they're very aesthetically pleasing. And as an art professor, I think I should get frustrated that I can't really pin down why I like them. But as a human, I like the fact that I can't pin it down. I just enjoy looking at it. And sometimes that's kind of a comfortable thought. Like I don't have to analyze a work of art all the time. I can just look and enjoy. And I think they're beautiful. I like the colors, I like the shapes. I think they're really interesting. Some of her work does reference um, historical art, like she'll take a painting from history and use that composition, but then use these non-representational shapes and colors. So sometimes I think I'm looking at an older painting and it's like, do I know that one? Usually I can't come up with it, but I just enjoy looking, right? I think they're beautiful paintings. Um, but I usually like more representational stuff, so I think it's really interesting that those paintings do that for me. And then you have a lot of street artists that's really big today. It started, I don't want to put a date on it, but around the 90s, the 80s of Keith Haring and Jean-Michel Basquiat inspired like the 90s and 2000s, mainly around the 2000s. You had artists like Shepard Fairey, who actually started with these stencils, these obey stencils that we talked about before when we talked about painting. And then he came up with the Obama poster that we talked about in painting. Artists like Banksy, who he's been around for a long time. I hate to bust anyone's bubble if you think Banksy is really cool and hip. He's my age. He's an old art nerd like me. And I think that's why he still tries to hide his identity because he doesn't want to admit he's some old dude like me. Um, but Banksy does this really interesting sort of street art where he incorporates the environment. And I keep waiting for Banksy to go away, but anytime there's anything big that happens in the world politically, it seems like Banksy is there. There was these refugees that were escaping the Middle East, and a lot of them went to Paris. And so he went to Paris and started to paint this image of these refugees in Paris. He did this piece not too long ago called Dismal Land, where he kind of made his own version of Disneyland. This one was cool because he used a lot of contemporary artists. One of the artists actually teaches locally. He's an art teacher at one of the local high schools that was involved with this project. He does a lot of really cool paintings of sort of a decaying Disneyland, which was kind of fell in love with what Banksy is doing. His name is Jeff Gillette. If you went to one of the local high schools, you may know him. He's an art teacher around here, but he did his own kind of Disneyland that's kind of falling apart and depressing, which was kind of funny. This was another piece that he did not too long ago that was pretty fascinating because Banksy always pretends to have an issue with the consumerism in art, that someone will take an artwork and they'll buy it for a lot of money, and then people think that that kind of validates the artwork. They're like, oh, if someone spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this thing, this artist must be good and it must be important. And Banksy's hugely famous right now, and I'm sure he's ridiculously rich. But there was this old guy in Central Park who was selling these pretty plain canvases with these stencils on them. Well, all of these stencils are known Banksy stencils. And this dude was selling each one of these canvases for 60 bucks. And people were coming by and they thought it was just some old dude who was making these fake Banksys. And he was selling them for 60 bucks. I think he only sold like 3 of them of people that went by. One dude actually convinced him to do a 2-for-1 deal. And then after later that night, Banksy posted on his website that these were all original Banksys, that Banksy had actually made those stencils and then hired this old dude to sell them. And so someone who bought this painting for 60 bucks, it automatically turned into $60,000, or maybe that's excessive. But anyway, it was worth a lot of money immediately. And so that was Banksy kind of playing with the market. And here's another one where he played with the market, and this came out not too long ago, which was pretty fascinating. He had this painting that he made and he put it in a frame, but also in the frame he built a paper shredder at the bottom of the frame. They sold his art at auction, and right after the guy slams the gavel, someone in the audience presses this remote and it turns on the shredder, and his artwork slides through the shredder to shred the work, to destroy it right after it was sold. Unfortunately, it didn't make it all the way through the shredder at the auction. And here's a cool little short 3-minute video that shows his process. He doesn't like the rich aristocrats that are buying up and running the art world.
Yeah, we've had a lot of interest on it, as you can imagine.
So he likes to play with them.
I found the most asked about and often the same. Yeah, so the artist put the frame on as well. You get that quite often with paints, you know, he quite likes the romanticism of, you know, having the very, you know, National Gallery-esque frame, you know.
What you think? And all the artwork this week sold is going to come in.
But I think this is like a fair price.
Girl with balloon, ladies and gentlemen, standing in the back of the room. And I'm going to start bidding here 100, 100. Take it, Thomas. Sebastian's bid at 750,000. If we never finish an auction with such energy at 750, no, 800 is the next bid. 800,000. Thank you. No pressure. Last chance at 850,000. 860. 860,000. Fair warning. Can I sell it now? At 860,000. Last chance. Bastien will be bidding and selling for.
That would have been better if it would have went all the way through, because since it's just dangling there, it's been resold by whoever bought it. People asked, did the guy get a refund or the person get a refund for this? And it actually became worth a lot more money because it's not just about the object anymore. Now it's about the idea and the content and everything that happens surrounding and the context of the work. And remember how much art is worth. It's only worth what someone's willing to pay, right? It's not about the actual objects. It's what someone's willing to pay. And so now this one that's half dangling is worth a lot more money. And he also went to Ukraine recently and did some work in Ukraine. So Banksy's still out there, right? And he's doing a lot of pretty important and some pretty prominent artwork. The next contemporary artist is Kehinde Wiley. He's a big painter today who's getting a lot of recognition. He's in a lot of shows. I keep stumbling upon him as I go to different art museums around the country. And you can see this postmodern idea where it looks like a Victorian or a Rococo style of painting with all the ornamentation and decoration of Baroque and Rococo that we talked about. But he's painting contemporary figures and people of today, specifically Black American people who have not always been depicted in art. Okay, he always said as a Black American artist that he didn't really see himself in a history of art. And so he's kind of changing that. One of the paintings that kind of put him on the map is when Obama was leaving office. He asked Kehinde Wiley to do his presidential portrait because each president has a presidential portrait. And so once you do that, it kind of puts you on the map in the art world. And again, you know, celebrity and artists intermingling. He did a painting of LL Cool J along with Obama. But he likes to paint sort of, you know, Black Americans, people part of, you know, a hip hop culture that he grew up in. He grew up in LA, and he grew up as not only a Black artist, but, you know, a Black homosexual artist, where that wasn't always respected. Black people, homosexuals have not always been respected in our culture, and he didn't really see that in a history of art. And so he used that as his subject matter. And then he combines it with this postmodern idea of painting like a Victorian painting that's about wealth and opulence. They kind of oddly hold this fruit. Well, fruit has always symbolized wealth and opulence. If you think back to like the late Renaissance and the Baroque period of like, remember Jan van Eyck's portrait of the two people that were getting married, and they were wearing these furs and these very opulent furs. That was them showing how rich and opulent they were. Well, within a hip hop culture, you wear these very expensive, team uniforms and things like that to show your opulence. My son, one of my boys, got into, well, it didn't work. He wanted to get into collecting shoes because, like old Nikes and, Air Jordans and these shoes, he wanted to be one of those collectors. Well, he doesn't have a job and he was only like 15 at the time. That means I would have to pay for the shoes. I said, that ain't happening. But we started going to some of those stores where they sell those shoes. Oh my gosh, these things are hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And so Kehinde Wiley is tying, that whole thing or culture, comparing it to what was happening in the Victorian age as well. And so sometimes he directly responds. This is from the academic period. This is a David painting of Napoleon from neoclassicism, where he's using that exact composition, the exact subjects, but he's replacing Napoleon with this African American man. And so here he is today. His paintings are very large, all right, and they're amazing to see. Well, not all of them. One that I stumbled across was very small, but he does these really big, gorgeous paintings. And just recently, he started to paint black women as well. Primarily, he focused on men, but recently he's been painting women in the same style. And actually, just last year, I ran into a Kehinde Wiley in a pretty amusing place. My sons and I, we went to Arizona last year. We went to go watch some Cubs games. The Cubs were playing in Phoenix, and so we went to watch some Cubs games. And anytime I visit a city, I always go to an art museum. And so the boys and I, we went to a Phoenix art museum. And it was an interesting experience because we were going through the Baroque or the Victorian section of the Phoenix Art Museum. And my son is over by a painting in front of me and he's kind of laughing. And I'm like, what are you laughing at? And he goes, oh, this guy, he looks like an influencer, someone on YouTube or something. And it was this guy here. It was this painting that he saw. And you may know the influencer. I don't know who it was, but he was talking about this. He's like, oh my gosh, look who it is. And I was like, we're in the Baroque era, right? This is the 17th century. I was like, I don't know why that would be. And then I looked at another one, which was this one here. And I'm like, that dude's wearing a hoodie. Right? You don't wear hoodies back then, or you don't wear these tank tops and these big pants back then. And then I looked at the label and I was like, oh, that's Kehinde Wiley. And I thought it was so cool because Kehinde Wiley, as a contemporary postmodern artist, he paints in a style of the Victorian age. Well, they just put his paintings there, right? And it's kind of cool to look at these old paintings and then see someone who's, first of all, black. You don't see many black people depicted in the Victorian age, and then wearing a hoodie and contemporary clothes, which was really kind of cool to experience. All right, so let's end with talking again about the duct tape banana, because we started the semester and we were trying to explain what is art by playing the little game with the duct tape banana, and we've been through a history of art and modern art and conceptual art. And let's try to very quickly explain how this can be art, right? Or how today someone would consider this art. Well, it all starts way back with Manet. Manet does La Décharnée sur Herbe. People get upset at him. How could he make a painting like this? And he says, I don't care. I'm ahead of my time. You guys are old. You don't know what we're doing. I'm new. I'm young. I'm hip. I'm doing something new. Creating something new becomes the foundation of modern art. So he sparks modern art. Then we got artists like Cézanne and other post-impressionists that are like, it's not what you paint, but how you paint it. And so you had artists that weren't focusing on making realistic imagery. He's just playing with different techniques of paint, and it can be different techniques. He inspires the avant-garde artists of the 20th century, and you got artists that are getting rid of representational objects. Artists like Vasily Kandinsky, who's just making paintings of shapes and colors. This gets all the way for years until the abstract expressionists, when you have artists that are like, paint should be about paint. And it shouldn't reference anything in the natural world. And I'm just going to make a square and a line And then, of course, we get to the white painting. Then you got people like Marcel Duchamp who says, well, anything can be art. And art doesn't just have to be a painting. I can take a urinal, I can put it on display, and we can call it art. And so we can redefine what art can be. So anything can be art. Then we go through all the conceptual arts where it's about the concept, it's about the idea. It's not about the final object, it's about the idea of what you did to display that object. And that's what leads us to the duct tape banana, right? It's not about the banana. It's not about the duct tape. It's about the idea that I can call anything art and I can get an audience member to buy into it, literally and figuratively. They will pay for it and they will say, hey, that's art. Okay, so that's kind of where we are in an art world, but not all art is duct tape bananas. There's some beautiful art out there. Here is a painter that I've been fascinated with recently. I stumbled upon him through social media, either Facebook or Instagram, I forget, and I follow him. His name is, I believe it's Will Rockford. He's a British painter, and I'm enamored by this guy, and I love his paintings. He reminds me of like illustration from like the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. He's a technically amazing painter. I'll be honest, I paint kind of similar to him. Here's one of my old paintings of my son where I like these layers and sort of glazing of paint. He's better than me, but I like his sort of style there. But it's kind of like this old-fashioned. People have compared him to Edward Hopper, who did the Nighthawks that we talked about. They also compare him to Norman Rockwell, who's an old illustrator that did the Saturday Evening Post from like the 1940s. But he's a newer sort of contemporary version of that. Sometimes he does figures of stuff when I was a kid, actually a little bit before my time. I was born in the 70s, not the 60s, but the Batman show from the 60s. So it's got a lot of nostalgia to it that I really, really like. Here's, I believe this was the first painting I saw on social media, and my mouth just sort of hit the floor. And if you zoom into this painting, like technically, he's so amazing. And if you look at him on Instagram, he has videos where he shows his technique, which I also love because I'm a painter. And I have a lot of social media communities where we talk about painting and techniques and colors we use and how we apply the paint and all that stuff. And he does that. And so it's absolutely amazing to see this type of painting. So the last lecture or slide presentation quiz question, I'd like you to write about a contemporary artist, someone who's living and working today that inspires you. Someone that you like. So if you don't have anyone off the top of your head, jump on social media right now. Go on Instagram or I don't know, whatever. And if you don't have Instagram or don't have social media, just Google, some contemporary artists. And I want you to find someone. I want you to share it with me. So tell me their name and tell me why you like them. Okay, you can write on and on and on, or it can just be a sentence or two, whatever you want. Give me their name and tell me why you like them, because I want to find new artists, and it's now your job to stay in tune with the art world and who's out there today. Hope you enjoyed it.